Welcome back. My name is Troy Vermillion, and I'm the host of your favorite technology podcast, What the Tech. Hey, before we get started today, I actually wanted to say thank you to those of you who have been supporting me on this channel. We've now hit over 60,000 views and downloads of the show since we kicked off our first episode in December of 2022. I'm super grateful for all of you, and especially the ones that have shown up and engaged with me on a weekly basis. And I want to say thank you to nearly 900 of you that have subscribed to the channel for weekly updates. As for today's topic, it's all about learning how to get and hold attention in our digital world. And I have a special guest who knows just how to do it. We'll be discussing how to keep people interested and engaged with your content, no matter what platform you're using. We'll go into and over the fundamentals of creating captivating content that will hold your people's attention, even after they've left your page or video. My guest has made a career by doing just that. So stay tuned for our insightful conversation about mastering the art of audience retention. Let's get started. I'm here with Josh Steimle, a Wall Street Journal and USA Today best-selling author who generated over $10 million for his businesses through books and articles published on outlets like Forbes, Fortune, Time, Mashable, TechCrunch, and Entrepreneur. He's also spoken at TEDx events worldwide and appeared on national TV and radio. Josh is the founder of several successful companies in marketing, publications, and the social media arena. And he's here today to share his secrets on how to hold people's attention. Welcome, Josh. It's great to have you with us today.
Thanks so much, Troy, for having me on.
Yeah, man, real excited about this conversation. We've been meaning to have this conversation for a while. We've gone back and forth. I don't know. It's probably been 6 months to a year, right? Where we just were trying to nail down the time. So I'm glad it's finally happening.
Me too.
Well, exciting topic here about holding people's attention, because I think, you made an argument the last time we spoke that there's a way to do it. And there's actually, you said it's never been easier, which I actually felt like it was the opposite because of our attention spans have gotten shorter and shorter. So before we even really kick into some of the other things, I want to understand your philosophy for holding people's attention and why you've been so effective at doing so for so long.
Well, it's true that in some ways it is harder than ever to get attention and maintain that attention. But the tools to do it are so accessible and they're so easy. And so in other ways, it's easier than ever. It's harder because there's a lot of noise, because there are a lot of people doing it. It's easier because it's so easy to do it. The only challenge that we really face these days is how do we cut through that noise? How do we stand out from the crowd? And there are ways to do that. But also to your point about shorter attention spans, I don't think that we do have shorter attention spans. I think that there's just a lot more stuff out there. And so there's this realization that, hey, I'm not stuck with this lame content. I'm not stuck with 3 news channels. There's so many things out there. And so because of that, we're kind of spoiled. So we look at all the options. And if something starts to bore us, we say, hey, I know there's something better out there. And it's probably really easy to find. And so we tend to switch around a lot, trying to find something that is going to stimulate us and give us that dopamine rush. But I don't think it's that we're incapable of staying focused longer or anything. I mean, kids are reading more books than ever. Look at Harry Potter. It's been a few years since that came out, but still, that was like thousands of pages of reading, and you had 7-year-old kids sitting down and just being glued to those books for hours. Now they're glued to other books that are out there. I don't know what they are, but I know they're reading a lot. I've got some kids and they're just glued to books. People will consume long form content if it's good enough to maintain their attention long enough.
I guess that's the real question. What is the formula for capturing and holding somebody's attention? That's actually what we're here to talk about today. So let's dive in deeper to that. So I know that you actually have a formula for kind of some of the ways that you approach things. I'll dive into that a little bit later as far as questions. But what do you think is the general framework or overall kind of strategy to first capture somebody's attention? A lot of people talk about whether it's like email marketing or it's, a post or certainly maybe a book cover. What would be the strategy that you would leverage in most cases? Is it shock and awe? Is it, What is it for you that has worked so successfully?
Well, two of the mistakes that people make when it comes to creating content, getting attention, is number one, they assume that whatever works for one person is what works for everybody. And so they see somebody like Gary Vaynerchuk, or pick your random famous person, and they say, well, hey, if this worked for them, it's going to work for me. And what they don't take into account is that person's operating within an entirely different set of circumstances. And so what's working for them might have zero effect for you, or maybe it'll work great, but we don't know just because it worked for that person. The other mistake that a lot of people make is they jump straight to making content. And sometimes it might be that they think, I just need to get something done. I need to produce something and just get it out there, and then I'll figure it out. And sometimes that strategy can work. You can put stuff out and you can figure it out as you go along. You can build the rocket ship after it's already in flight. But by just pausing for a few minutes, or maybe a few hours, but taking a little bit of time to do some research and thinking and create a strategy, you can really increase the chance that your content is going to find the right audience and then make the impact on that audience that you want it to.
Excellent point. So you've built your own personal brand, and a lot of that has been around thought leadership, in and around promoting yourself, writing books, certainly marketing and social media. What has been your formula that has worked for you, and how did you go about developing that formula? Was it trial and error, and now you're able to show people like, hey, I've done it that way, and now I'm going to show you a better kind of format for doing it? Or did you find yourself being really introspective beforehand and asking the questions beforehand, and that's why you were so successful with your efforts?
I am definitely telling people to do as I say and not as I did, because I did everything wrong.
Right.
Well, I can't say I did everything wrong, but I did it in the wrong order, and I didn't have a strategy, and I didn't know what I was doing. So I had to figure it out the hard way. But once I got that figured out, then things became easier. And maybe my story's kind of instructive. So I started a marketing agency back in 1999, and for the next 13 years, I ran that business sometimes into the ground, and sometimes it was successful. And the successes outweighed the failures enough that it kept me involved and kept me doing it rather than shutting the business down, which I seriously considered many times. But I ran that business for 13 years, and then I wasn't really seeing progress, and then everything changed in a moment, which was in 2013, I got the opportunity to write for Forbes magazine. I was given a column by an editor there, and he said, hey, just write whatever you want to write about. And so I thought, this is an amazing opportunity to write for a magazine like this. And so I just started writing stuff. I didn't know why I was writing what I was writing, other than that it was interesting to me. And so I was writing articles about leadership and startups and marketing and just all sorts of things. And there was no strategy to it other than, let's just produce some content and see what happens. And after a few months, I realized I'm not really getting anything out of this. I mean, it's fun. It's kind of building my personal brand because people see me in Forbes, but I wasn't connecting with anybody who was then wanted to hire my agency, my marketing agency. So it wasn't producing any dollars for me that way. And I noticed that there were a lot of other marketers on Forbes writing, and they were all writing about marketing. They were all writing about what their companies did. Now, they weren't doing it in a self-promotional way. They weren't saying, hey, come hire my company because my company's great. Look what we're doing. But they were giving advice. They were answering questions, and they were answering questions about the stuff that their agency did. And so it was a very subtle form of marketing where they weren't overtly promoting, but at the same time, people were coming to recognize them as the experts on these topics that were related to their company. So I thought, well, maybe I should do that, which is kind of a no-brainer, but I'm a little bit slow. So I wrote an article about marketing that was related to my agency, and we got some leads out of it. And I thought, well, hey, this actually works. And so I kept writing marketing articles. I kind of dumped everything else and started writing articles about marketing. And then I wrote one article that was really the eye-opener for me. It really blew up in a good way. And that article was about how to hire an SEO firm. My agency was doing a lot of search engine optimization work, SEO work, And so this article about how to hire an SEO firm hit everything just perfect. First of all, if you're somebody who's trying to hire an SEO firm and you go to Google, you might type in how to hire an SEO firm. And if you type in how to hire an SEO firm, you're probably looking to hire an SEO firm. So people were typing this into Google with the intent to find a company they could hire to do their SEO work. And up pops my article, number 1, because it's on Forbes, and Forbes ranks really well in Google. And I had structured my article with the headline, How to Hire an SEO Firm. So it's this perfect match for exactly what people were typing in. It was on a very reputable website, so it was coming up number 1. And then they're looking at this and they're saying, hey, here's an article that looks like it's going to answer the exact question I typed in. It's on Forbes, so it's credible. And they click through and they start reading my article, and enough people liked that article and thought, this guy seems to know what he's talking about, that then they started saying, well, who is this guy? And then they go look at my bio and they see, oh, he runs a marketing agency. Oh, his agency actually does SEO. Why don't we go hire this guy? I mean, he wrote the article that ranked number 1, and that is in Forbes. Now, if you wrote that article about anything else, it wouldn't have the same impact. But the fact that it was about SEO was really key. It was like this perfect storm of everything being lined up. That article by itself, that one article, I can track over $5 million in revenue back to that single article that I wrote, because it made our phones ring off the hook for years. We were getting so much business. And when we'd ask people, hey, how'd you find us? They're like, oh, I read this article in Forbes about how to hire an SEO firm. And then I figured, why don't I call the guy who wrote this article? So that article really, as I said, opened my eyes to, I did something right here, and I want to figure out what it is so that I can duplicate it. Well, I thought I had the key. I thought the key was I write articles about how to hire SEO firms, and then I get those articles in as many places as I can, and I'm going to get more of this. And so after a few years, I went to Entrepreneur Magazine, and I got a column there as well. And I thought, I'm going to take that Forbes article that generated millions of dollars for my agency, and I'm going to rewrite it, but basically the same article, and then I'm going to put it up on Entrepreneur, and I'm going to double my business because now it's in 2 outlets. And so that's what I did. I rewrote that article. I put it up on Entrepreneur, and nothing happened. It was crickets. We didn't get a single lead off that article. The article was showing up in search engines, so it's not like it was invisible or something. It was in Entrepreneur, another credible publication, but I got nothing from it. And I thought, what's going on here? This was so amazing in Forbes. It did so much for us, and now it's doing nothing for us in Entrepreneur. What did I get wrong here? And so those kinds of questions and trying to figure this out led me to create my formula, which is called the 7 Systems of Influence. And I'll walk through these real quick, and this will show where I made mistakes and where I did some of these things right. So the 7 Systems of Influence starts out with system number 1, which is vision, coming up with an idea of what you want. So for myself as an agency owner, I wanted to grow my business. I wanted to get more clients. So that was the thing I was trying to figure out. That was my vision, was a growing, thriving business with lots of leads coming in. The second system is Genius Zone, which is what is the combination of traits, characteristics, abilities, skills, experience that makes you special. For me, it was, hey, I've run an SEO firm for a long time, so I can write about it, and I know SEO really well. I own an agency, and I'm writing for Forbes. And so you put that all together, and that made me an authority figure to speak and write about SEO. And the third system is audience. So audience is 2 things. It's who the people are that you're trying to impact, and it's where they hang out. Well, this is what I got wrong, is my audience for my marketing agency was hanging out on Forbes, but they weren't hanging out on Entrepreneur. Maybe the people on Forbes were a little bit more established. They had bigger budgets. They actually had businesses that were up and running. Maybe the people on Entrepreneur were more startups and they're just getting things going. They don't have any money, or maybe they're just not to that stage where they're looking for SEO. I don't know. But what I do know is my audience, my ideal audience, was not on Entrepreneur, but they definitely were on Forbes. And so that's something that I had to come to understand about when you produce content. You've got to put it in front of your ideal audience where they're actually going to find it. It's only the fourth system where we actually start talking about content and creating content. And so in my case, I created content first, and I wrote dozens of articles for Forbes before I had gone through these previous steps of vision, genius zone, and audience. And that's why I was writing articles that weren't hitting, that weren't doing anything for me, because I hadn't thought through that strategy of who am I trying to impact? What do I want them to do? Where are these people hanging out? What kind of content would get them to do the things that I want them to do? I stumbled into it, but because I didn't have a strategy, I wasted months and a lot of effort and a lot of time writing articles that didn't hit before I got lucky and figured out the one that did hit. So those are the first 4 systems in the 7 systems. And then the rest are collaboration, or it's action, which is coming up with your plan, what you're actually going to do, setting up a content calendar, something like that. Then it's collaboration, figuring out who you can work with to 100x the impact that you make with your influence. And then the last one is love, which is doing it for the right reasons, really caring about your audience. So those are the 7 systems, and that's my story. And hopefully that's helpful in seeing how it worked for me and how it might work for those who are listening.
Yeah, it's helpful for me. So, I've been in sales and marketing for over 20 years, and I find it interesting that the 5th one was action. And a lot of times, action is the first thing that I have a tendency to do, that a lot of people have a tendency to do. It's action without thought, right? That's the 5th thing to do. I actually want you to dive deeper into the collaboration part. Like, I think that's such an important part. Once you're starting to produce things, having people engage with it, people that are credible, trustworthy, and that you've got some sort of relationship with. But how did you go about that in developing relationships? Was it Forbes? Was it that did it, or did you find people and reach out kind of cold or directly?
Well, I blogged for 10 years, and I wrote 1,000 blog posts. I counted them up. I wrote over 1,000 blog posts on my personal blog for 10 years, and nobody cared. I got virtually no traffic. And as soon as I started writing for Forbes, all of a sudden I was popular at the parties and people knew who I was. I was in Hong Kong once and a drunk guy came up and said, "Are you Josh Steimle?" And I was like, "Who are you?" And he's like, "Oh, I've read your articles on Forbes." Like, this guy recognized me on the street because I was writing for Forbes. Nobody ever did that when I was just writing for my own blog. So that's one example of the power of collaboration. By connecting myself to Forbes, their brand rubbed off on me and gave me a credibility that I never got when I was writing for myself, even though I was writing the same stuff. The content was the same, but the collaboration was different. And there are all sorts of different collaborations. You can, when I'm writing an article, I collaborate with my sources. For example, I wrote, my first book was Chief Marketing Officers at Work. And I was writing for Forbes. I won't say that I was a nobody, but hardly anybody knew who I was really. But I went out and I interviewed 30 CMOs from companies like PayPal, Spotify, Home Depot, Target, bunch of big companies. And people didn't know those people's names either, but they knew the companies that they worked for. And so when I published my book, people were buying the book, not because it was Josh Steimle wrote it. I mean, my parents bought it for that reason. They weren't buying it necessarily because they knew the names. They didn't know who Seth Farbman was, even though he was the former CMO of Gap and the CMO at Spotify. Most people didn't know who he was by his name. They were buying the book because they saw those names of those companies and said, "Hey, I want to read the book that has the CMOs from these companies." Well, that was a collaboration too, right? That book sold way more copies and got way more attention because I collaborated with those people and interviewed them and put their names and those company names on the cover of the book and in all the marketing. There are a million different ways to collaborate with others. We see collabs all over the place on social media with different brands. You see Supreme, which is a streetwear company, collaborating with Louis Vuitton and the North Face and Nike. There are all sorts of collabs that are going on, and the collaboration is just, it's a way to get exposure to new audiences. It's a way to get better content out there in front of people. So there are all sorts of benefits that come from collaboration. And what you can do with collaboration it's like 1,000x or 10,000x or 1,000,000x what you can do on your own.
Yeah, I think collaboration has been something that's been on my target more and more in 2022 and 2023. And one of the reasons why I wanted to get you on the show, because I do think you've got such a great voice for, content, for, any sort of, marketing. And I wanted to kind of maybe go a little bit more into your strategies around, like, what are the things that I guess gather and hold people's attention that, honestly, people aren't thinking about, innately are not thinking about, because I feel like I'm good in front of people when I have that audience, but sometimes getting their attention and actually, getting them to consume, whether it is your content or take a next step, which, in marketing, a lot of times that could be fill out a form. It could be, take this action, purchase here, whatever it is. What do you feel is kind of the pivotal parts of, the attention grabbers, and then how do you hold their attention for a long period of time? And writing books, you obviously have to hold people's attention through, a lot of pages. It could be, hundreds of pages in many cases. So talk maybe more about that strategy and how you've successfully done it.
Well, there are multiple parts to attention. There's getting the attention, there's maintaining the attention, there's turning the attention into action, getting people to do what you actually want them to do. As far as getting attention and hooking attention, one of the best books out there, I'm going to grab it off the shelf here.
Now we get a good look at the shelf.
Okay, here it is. So this book, Hook Point by Brendan Kane. This book is one of the best books I've read on how to get attention. And basically what it's about is he's done research to show that you've got about 3 seconds to hook somebody's attention, to draw them in before they move on to the next thing. This is when you're first exposing somebody to a new message. And there's a whole book on this, so I won't try to summarize the entire book, but some of the helpful things that came out of this book that have helped me to understand how to hook attention are thinking about things like, you've got an audience. Let's say you've identified your ideal audience that you want to connect with, whose attention you want to get. What is the problem that audience has that they are walking around with in their heads all day long, that they're saying, if only I could do this, if only I could figure this out? For example, in my marketing agency, we've been talking about reaching out more to healthcare clients. We've done a lot of marketing for different healthcare companies, hospital chains, things like that. And so we've thought about, well, hey, how do we create some marketing materials to intentionally reach out to that audience and get more of that audience in? And it's really easy when you sit down and you start talking marketing strategy to say, well, we could put some content out about like healthcare trends in marketing for 2023. But here's the thing. The people who are doing marketing at the healthcare companies are not walking around all day long saying, ugh, I wish I knew what the trends were in marketing for 2023 within the healthcare space. Those aren't the words that they're using. Those aren't the thoughts that they're having. They're saying things like, I need to recruit 1,500 nurses within the next 6 months to my hospital, and I've been tasked with this as the marketing person. How do I get that done? And so what we have to figure out as an agency is, what are those specific problems that they have that we can solve? Can we set up a marketing program that would help this hospital chain recruit those 1,500 nurses in the next 6 months? Well, yeah, we've done that. We can do that. That's the type of work that we do. But if we don't say that that's the problem we're solving, that person might hear our message on social media, in a video, they might read it somewhere, and they're going to say, I don't need the trends for 2023. I need to find nurses. They don't know that we can actually do that because we haven't told them that we can do that we haven't told them we can solve the problem they have. And so just that little exercise of figuring out what is the problem that my audience has that is keeping them up at night, that they're thinking about all the time and trying to figure that out. If you can identify that problem, it makes it really easy to create a message and just say, hey, we solve X problem. And then people say, hey, they solved my problem. That's the problem I need to solve. And of course, they're going to want to talk to you then. So that's one of the helpful things I got out of Brendan Kane's book was how to figure out that problem and really construct a message that reaches out to the ideal audience and tells them, I can solve this problem that you have. When it comes to maintaining attention, there's another book that I read, and I can't remember the author's name, but it's called Binge Marketing. It's on the shelf back here. It's in the red section. I'm not going to try to get it this time, but it's there. But Binge Marketing, and effectively what she says is she takes the Netflix model. So we've all heard of Netflix binging, where people sit for 10 hours at a time and just keep watching Netflix over and over and over. And the way that Netflix does this is it's almost a cliche now with these shows, but you watch a show like Downton Abbey or The Last of Us or whatever, it always ends on a cliffhanger, right? You're watching an episode, it gets to the end, and you're like, oh man, they left me with this cliffhanger, and now I want to watch the next one. Because what they're doing is they're creating a story loop, and at the end of every episode, they leave that story loop open, and mentally, we want to close that story loop. We want some sense of closure, and we can only get it by watching the next episode. And of course, what they do is they close that story loop 10 minutes in or 20 minutes into the next episode, and then they open a new one that they're not going to close at the end because they want to leave us on a cliffhanger. They want to get us into the next episode. And so we can do the same thing as marketers with our content. If you're writing an article, you can end it in some way that it leaves something open. You can say, hey, this is going to continue in my next article. I'm going to talk more about this. Or if you're writing a book, you can end your chapters that way and end a chapter with a cliffhanger and say, in the next chapter, I talk about such and such. Well, you've just opened one of these thought loops, and people say, I really got to close that thought loop, so I'm going to go into the next chapter. But of course, you're going to do it over and over and over again, all the way to the end. And then at the end, you're going to put something in there saying, oh, by the way, I've got this resource online that has all the updates to my book, and go to this website and you can download that and put in your email address. And now you've got them on your email list because you're using that Netflix secret of open story loops to keep people engaged all the way through to the action that you want them to take.
Yeah, and that just makes sense. I was watching a show with my wife last night, and basically the only reason we watched the next episode was because it had a story that wasn't quite finished, that she was like, oh, now I got to see the next episode. And it was kind of late, so I was a little bit tired. But it makes perfect sense, Josh. It makes perfect sense. So I'm curious, when you're writing content that maybe is a little bit drier, like how do you take something like that, and create those hooks in something that maybe is either super technical, like SEO is super technical, right? There's so many different things that you have to learn in SEO. So how do you educate somebody who's not necessarily like in the SEO world, an expert in that? How do you take complex things and simplify them in such a way, and then keep them reading to that, to the point that they reach out to you?
There's no topic so complex that it can't be simplified to the point that a child can understand it. And there's nothing out there that's so boring that it can't be made interesting. If you know those two facts, then you can figure out how to make anything understandable and anything interesting. And the real key to both is stories. If you can create a story, it will be interesting and you can make things understandable. And so my marketing agency, we work with self-storage clients, self-storage companies. It's the most boring business out there. It's a building shaped like a box, and it has rooms shaped like boxes, and then you fill up those rooms with boxes and you leave them there for 2 years. That's the whole business. It's really boring. And yet, one of the most popular cable shows of all time was Storage Wars, which was a show about self-storage. It was massively popular. So, because it had stories and it was exciting. You wanted to see what was in these storage things, these storage rooms that people were buying, where people had left their junk and stuff, because sometimes it was trash and sometimes it was treasure. So they made us something interesting out of the most boring business in the world. So anything can be interesting. Engineering. I just read a book about, it's called the God Equation by, I'm going to butcher the name, 𝗔𝗊𝘁 or something, Japanese guy. But it's all about quantum physics and the Higgs boson particle. It's stuff that to most people, to me, would just go whoop right over my head. Even though my dad's a rocket scientist and I grew up around this stuff, still, this stuff usually it's just like, Stephen Hawking, I don't know what these people are saying. But this guy simplified that book to the point where I was reading it and it made me feel smart, because I was like, wow, I actually understand this stuff. He's making this so simple and so clear and interesting, and he's telling stories. So you can take something that's really complex, you can simplify it, and you can make it interesting by putting stories in there, humanizing it, bringing people into it. So if I could just simplify my advice to one bit, I would just say, tell lots of stories. Put everything into a story. People will listen to stories. We're hardwired to listen to stories. It's part of our survival mechanism to listen to stories. And people remember stuff better when you put it in a story as well. When I was 5 years old, my parents took me to church every Sunday, and I slept through church every Sunday. I'd sit on my dad's lap and I was out. But I remember one Sunday when I was 5 years old, the leader of our congregation got up and he told a story about an 800-pound purple gorilla. I've only heard that story once in my life, and I swear that story was like 20 minutes long. I can tell that whole story in detail from hearing it once when I was 5 years old, because it was a story and it was interesting. It kept me awake that day. I'm not sure what it had to do with anything else at church, but it was an interesting story, and I still remember it to this day. If you can incorporate that kind of storytelling into whatever it is you're selling, whatever it is you're promoting, people will remember it, and they'll even tell that story to other people.
So for those that are looking for inspiration from, for their stories, like do you have a formula for how you go about that? Identifying a story that is relevant to the topic or content. I think that a lot of times is get the information out, whether it's a million bullet points or, ideas, that you're trying to get out there. But then how do you pull in the stories? Like what is your approach for that?
I love to tell stories that actually happened to me, because then it's personal, it's easy. And I can also modify the story on the fly if I need to fit the circumstances. So I tend to try to not tell other people's stories because it's hard. If I tell my own story, it's very authentic. It comes through as being something that comes from my heart. And I try to get vulnerable in stories too, wherever I can. So I talk about my mistakes. I talk about things I've done wrong. I talk about feelings. I talk about all the touchy-feely stuff. Vulnerability breeds trust. And the great thing about trust is we do business with people we know, like, and trust. So when you get vulnerable, people feel like they know you because you're opening up and you're getting personal. They like you because they feel like, oh, this story is interesting. People who are interesting are likable. And they trust you because you're getting vulnerable. You're saying, hey, I trust you enough to tell you something very personal about me. I'm putting my fate in your hands by telling you this story that might make me look bad, or that could make me look bad, or that shows part of me that you could make fun of or something. Well, that makes the listener feel like, oh, I'm going to trust this person because they're being vulnerable with me. So I like to tell personal stories for that reason. Obviously, the story has to be applicable in some way to the current situation. So I have a friend of mine. She helps fund managers raise lots of money. She's raised something like $23 billion for her fund managers. And we were in a mastermind together, and we were talking about stories and using stories. And she's like, oh, my stuff's boring and it's complex, just like we were just talking about. And she's like, and these people, like, they're very proud people. They think they run the world by managing these funds, and I'm trying to help them raise money. How do I help them raise money? So we were talking about, well, how can you help them to tell more of their stories? She said, oh, I don't know. I'm like, well, tell me a story about when you were working with somebody and they were able to raise a lot of money. Just tell me how that went down. How did they raise a lot of money? Oh, we helped this guy raise $1 billion. Okay, how did you do that? And she started telling the story about how they went into this meeting and they were pitching to investors. And she talked about how she opened up and she got vulnerable and she told things that she normally wouldn't say. And everybody at the end of it didn't really care about the numbers. They didn't really care about the math. They trusted her because of the story, and they raised a ton of money off of that. And I was like, do you see what happened here? You just told me a story about how you raised all this money, and it was because you told a story. And she's like, and this light bulb went on. That was about 2 years ago. She does a monthly newsletter. Every single one of her newsletters from that point on, she's telling stories in every single one of those newsletters. So it's working for her. So there's always stories out there. No matter how boring the business is, you can figure out some sort of story about something to illustrate. And the more you do it, it gets easier, because once you get your mind into that frame of, I need to find stories to tell, you start noticing them everywhere. Everybody's got stories to tell.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I do think people have a tendency to think, okay, I'm really good at my job, and let's say you are, but it's so challenging to be vulnerable in that position because a lot of people think that that's going to be perceived as a negative thing. But you're arguing that it's really the exact opposite. It's the human, human complex that, we all believe we've got to be something that we're not. Like, a lot of times you meet somebody for the first person. I think dating is like this. I haven't dated anybody in a really long time. I've been married for over 20 years now, Josh. But, a lot of times you meet that person's representative. I think there was a funny commercial that was like, they were talking about that they were basically being their fake self. And I don't think that that's what people really want. And I think that, as you've pointed out, they actually see that, when your content isn't authentic. And that's why the value, therefore, is in telling your own story in an authentic way. So was that something that came innately, like, normal to you, or was that something that you had to work on?
I think it did come somewhat naturally to me, although not earlier in my life. I was a very shy kid growing up, extremely shy, like painfully shy. And to the point, speaking of dating, I didn't go on a date with a girl till I was 22. Like, that's how shy I was. And then my first date, it was because somebody forced me into it too. So I was a super shy kid. I was not used to talking. That all changed for me. When I was 19, I went on a mission for my church. I was a missionary, and I went down to Brazil, and I was supposed to talk to people 24 hours a day for 2 years. That's all I was supposed to be doing. And that's when I learned to open up and start talking to people. And when I came back, I kind of couldn't stop talking. And so I would gravitate towards the people at college, my roommates, or people on my dorm floor or something, that would listen to me talk. And the people who would just sit and listen were like my best friends. And I just couldn't stop talking, and I'd just tell stories about stuff. And I learned to love talking. I learned to love telling stories. And so it grew out of that. But going back to some of the challenges of getting there and opening up and being vulnerable, I just read a great book by Patrick Lencioni. A lot of people have read his books. He's the guy who always tells stories about business situations to illustrate a point. I think he's got like 20 books out there. But I just read this book called Getting Naked, and it's all about getting vulnerable. And he talks about 3 fears that we face when it comes time to get vulnerable. And he says we fear losing the business, we fear being embarrassed, and we fear feeling inferior compared to our clients or in front of our clients. And he talks about how if we can get over those fears, we're actually going to build a much stronger connection and a lot of trust with our clients and customers. And so he goes through in the book how to get over those 3 fears. But just recognizing that those fears exist and that we don't need to have those fears. They aren't good fears. They're not productive fears. So if we can get rid of those fears, it opens us up to a new world where we feel more confident, we can tell stories, we can get vulnerable, and we're going to get those connections with the people that we want to impact.
Yeah, think about how powerful a story is, in movies. Like, movies are, multi-billion-dollar industry for a reason, because we innately are kind of built to hear stories. And I think the truer it is, I love this when you actually see on a movie, it says inspired by a true story, right? Because now I'm like really interested, because I know at the end of it, it's going to tell me all about the person this movie was about, right? Which I always like. I love that part just as much as the movie. A movie that I really liked recently was Devotion. I don't know if you saw that one.
I haven't seen that one.
It's a really good one, but it's about aircraft pilot that basically sacrificed himself. I thought he was going to live. I just thought he downed his plane for his fellow soldier, but he ended up dying. And And, those are the sorts of things that like really inspire people to, and I'm sure inspired, the soldiers around him, to be better soldiers because of things like that. Now, I'm not saying everything has, nobody, you don't have to be a martyr in every situation, but, I grew up really poor, Josh, like really like stupid poor. And I think about some of the things I had to do just to, have some experiences. I give an example. So I got a magazine in the mail one time where they offered all these cool little toys and, things like that. But on the high end, they had this digital watch that was like a calculator watch. And I was just enamored with this thing. And when I looked at how much I had to sell, it didn't even matter. I was just going to do it, right? And I remember I just walked to every house, and I lived in a rural part of Northern California. So like walking to people's houses was not like right next door. It was a walk, right? But I remember every day after school, I just would hit every house that was anywhere near me. And I am getting that calculator watch, and it wasn't, but a few months later. But it was so important to me, and I remember taking that same mindset into sales. I worked for a company called Cintas, and they had a motto that I really, I guess, connected with called, they would say every door, every floor, because they sold floor mats, right, for businesses. And I just remember walking through a pair of shoes every 3 months. They weren't super nice shoes. I guess, they were nice compared to what I had as a kid. But, those are the sorts of things that kind of, help me develop the drive that I have over time. And I think people appreciate those sorts of things, right, Josh?
Yeah. And that was a great story right there, right? You told us a story, you drew us into your personal background, and then you related it to your career and your professional side. Like, that was great.
Yeah. So I guess kind of bringing it all home, how do you maintain somebody's attention for a long period of time? Maybe not a book, but you've got people that have been following you for years, Josh. Long time. Like, how do you keep people engaged? How do you feel it's important to continue to reinvent yourself? I know that you're a bit of a serial entrepreneur. You do a lot of different things, and that's probably, you admitted to me that is probably not the greatest thing, but it's part of who you are, right? And I think there's actually quite a few people out there that could resonate with that. But talk about that. Maybe how do you keep people engaged for the long term?
You're right. There are some people who have followed me for years, and I'm so grateful for every one of those people. I'm always amazed when somebody comes and just talks to me or hires one of my businesses or buys something, and I keep hearing this phrase over and over again. I've been following you for years. I've been reading your blog posts or your LinkedIn posts for years. And when I hear that, I think, oh, that means so much to me, because first I'm just like flattered and I'm flabbergasted that anybody would actually follow me for years. But I'm so grateful for that. And I think this really gets to the seventh system in my 7 systems of influence, which is love. Like, I really care about the people that I'm trying to influence. I'm not trying to influence. I mean, I need to pay the bills just like everybody else. I like to live indoors and wear pants. I mean, I need money, right? So I've got to sell something. I've got to be doing something to make money and pay for to live. So there's that side of things. But I wish I didn't have to worry about any of that stuff. I wish I could just do what I want to do, because I love working with people. The stuff that I do, the interactions I have with people, I do because I really enjoy it. And yes, I need to make the money too, but I would still do it even if I didn't have to make the money. And I think that comes through when we care about people that way. I think people can sense that pretty easily, actually. And when you don't have that, people really pick up on that as well. They feel that every interaction is just transactional. We're just doing this deal because some of it's good for me and some of it's good for you. And so we're going to do this deal and then we're going to go our separate ways. But for me, I really care about the people that I'm trying to influence, and I really want to connect with everybody. And one of my biggest regrets is that it's just hard to connect with everybody all the time and spend as much time with people. And I'm sure there are people out there who are like, well, I tried to connect with you and you didn't answer my message, or you didn't get back to me fast enough or something. And I always feel bad about that type of stuff, because I wish I could just sit down with people all day long and just talk with people and connect with people and help people. But it's the wanting to do that that really matters. It's the sincerely caring about people. When that comes through, then people stick with you because they say, hey, this is somebody who wants to help me. And maybe they don't know how to help me today, but maybe they will in the future. Or it's, one of my business partners put it this way. He said, he came from a home that was kind of a rough upbringing. And I guess you could say maybe his parents weren't the perfect parents. But one thing he said to me stood out. He said, just knowing that my parents love me makes up for a lot of problems or a lot of faults or a lot of shortcomings. And so that's the reason that System 7 is love, is because you can get everything else right with the 7 systems, but if you're missing that love component, if people sense that you don't care about them, all the other stuff isn't going to work. And yet you can get everything else wrong in the 7 systems. And if you've got the love part there and you're messing up all the other stuff, your content, your audience, if you've got the love, people will sense it and you're still going to get results. And so love really is the key on which everything turns, because you don't have it, nothing works. You have it, things can still work out even if you get everything else wrong.
Yeah, I'm curious with the love part. You know, I know you're a man of faith, and that that love is a big part of, you know, having faith. And I'm curious if that had a big impact on that being number 7. Did that kind of come naturally to you because of experiencing that and kind of having that in your back pocket?
I don't know if I'd say it came naturally or not. It was definitely the hardest system for me to figure out. When I was creating the 7 systems, and the way you create these things is you start getting ideas about how something might work or how there might be a formula, and you start saying, well, this might be the first piece and this is the second piece or whatever, and you're reordering things. I knew there were 7, but I could not figure out what number 7 was. I came up with the first 6 really quickly, and I was like, yeah, it's these 6, and these are the order in which they should go and everything. But I was like, there's something missing. There's something else here. And for a long time, I thought it was mindset or attitude or something, which is kind of related, but it didn't really capture what I was after. I was like, there's something more than just attitude or mindset here. And it was a while. I can't remember if it was just several months or if it was more than a year, but it took me a while before I finally was like, wait, it's love. Love really is the only word that encapsulates what I'm going after with system number 7. But once I found it, I knew it was it. It was a little embarrassing at first because I was like, how do I talk about all this business stuff? And then at the end, I'm like, and love. I was like, but that's it. There's no other word that does it justice. I've got to make that it. And that's how it became system number 7.
I think as men, we have a hard time saying the word love, right? Especially
in a professional context.
Right. Not to our kids, not to our spouse, but, you know, it's definitely to people that maybe we don't know. But I mean, that's really what it is, right? There's different types of love. I mean, the Bible talks about the different types of love. Like the brotherly love, agape love, and you know, things like that. So I appreciate you actually sharing that and being a little bit vulnerable, because I do think it is love that brings everything together. Because if you don't love the people that you're working with and you're not doing it for their best interest, how good are you really going to be, right? Are you really going to take it to the next level for them? And I think that's probably why people do come up to you and say, hey, you're that guy, right? Because, you know, everything that you're putting out there is full of that love that you're talking about. I was going to ask you one last question before I let you go today, Josh, because I am curious, you know, how are books, because you published some books, man, and you've got like 6 in flight right now. How are books so different than kind of the content that we're seeing, you know, regularly through blog posts or articles or, you know, social media? How are those different in your opinion?
A book takes a lot of work, and that's what makes it different. When you see that somebody's written a book, even if you've never written a book before and you don't really know what goes into writing a book, you know that if somebody's written a book, they've put a bunch of effort into getting that out there, and that means something to people. And it also is just a sign of credibility, because it used to be that it was really hard to get a book published. Now it's a piece of cake. It's so easy to do it on Amazon. At the same time, it's still hard just to write the book and get it ready to send it through to Amazon. So I think we look at people who have written a book and we say, they spent the time to think things through, to edit things, to really think about what was going to go in this book. And so that book represents their best thinking. It's different than a blog post. I mean, I can go kick out a blog post in 20 or 30 minutes or something, but if it's not good, I can edit it or I can take it down and delete it. But when you have a book, once you send that to publish, people buy the book and then it's on their shelf. You can never take it back. You can't edit it. And so you have to make sure that that book is in really good shape. And so I think there's a lot of appreciation for books for all those reasons, that it's so hard, and we believe that it represents the best wisdom of the author.
Excellent. Yeah, that's helpful for me, because I was curious your perspective on that. Being active both digitally and certainly, publishing, books, how differently those could hit with people as well. Do you feel like everybody who has something to say should write a book, or is that maybe too much of a blanket statement?
Everyone should write a book. Not everyone should publish a book. Writing a book is a great exercise, even if nobody else ever sees it. I mean, everybody should write a book just for their own sake. And when I say everybody, I mean, there are some exceptions, perhaps. There are people who cannot write a book. I have friends who have mental blocks. They can't read a book, let alone write a book. I know people who can't type, and I mean, they could still hire a ghostwriter or something, but you're not going to do that just for the sake of writing your own book necessarily. So, I mean, virtually everybody, I think, should write a book just as a form of a healthy exercise. But I do believe that everybody does have fascinating stories. I believe everybody has wisdom that they can pass on to some niche audience that's out there. And if there's anybody who would benefit from that book, there are probably 10,000 people out there who would benefit from that book. Does that mean that everybody should write a book just for that reason? Maybe, maybe not. Everybody's going to feel like they should do whatever they're supposed to be doing with their limited time, and maybe a book is not the thing for them to be doing. But I think there's definitely, I know, absolutely there is a book in everybody, because everybody's life is fascinating. There's no such thing as a boring life. People are bored at times, but when you look at a life in its whole, and it doesn't matter if it's a short life or a long life, everybody's life is fascinating and interesting and unique. It's like snowflakes. I mean, every snowflake is completely different from every other snowflake, and they're interesting for that reason. And it's the same with human life, but on a scale that's 1,000,000 times more interesting than that.
Right, and more valuable. So I want to thank you for coming on here and hitting a home run for me today. I actually learned a bunch of things. Obviously, I'm going to stay in touch with you. I always like to ask, for my listeners' sake, for those who are interested in hiring you or chatting with you, connecting with you, collaborating with you, or just listening to you in other podcasts, where can they find you? Where's the best place?
Best place is my website, joshsteimle.com, and Steimle is spelled S-T-E-I, M as in Mary, L-E.
Awesome. Well, I want to, again, thank you for coming on, and thank you so much for the listeners of What the Tech. Really appreciate you. Hit that boop the like button for my man Josh here. Subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes, and we'll see you next week with What the Tech.